Well, hello everybody. This month we have special guest Eli Holder talking to us about intentional charts and how we can mislead ourselves. We're going to talk about politics, yes, Rorschach tests, and think about how we need to reflect about what we do in our own work. That's what's coming up. Welcome to Chart Chat 53.
Whoosh. Exciting news to get things kicked off for the last show of the summer.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Andy Cotgreave. Let me just get some slides on the screen. Yeah, we've got a great show for you today. We've got Eli Holder. This is Chart Chat. It's not just chit chat. It is Chart Chat. And as always, we're delighted to have you with us. I'm here with my guests, with my co-hosts. Steve, say hi.
Hello, I'm Steve Wexler, Chief Chart Looker at Data Revelations.
And Jeff Shaffer.
Jeff Shaffer from the University of Cincinnati, coming to you from Wisconsin today.
It's a real background behind him. It's not a fake background. That really is his house. And Amanda.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Makulec. I am a data viz designer based here in Washington, D.C., and serve as the executive director for the Global Data Visualization Society. Excited to be here today.
Great to have you all. And Eli will introduce himself in a moment. Desiree, great to see you. Thank you for the comments. Everybody else, tell us where you are and what's the best bit about your day so far. As always, you are encouraged to join the debate. We are 5 hosts, but we'd love to know what you're saying as well. So whether you're live or on demand, tell us what you're thinking. It's great to generate conversation. And if you want to stick around, if you're watching live, you can stick around and come to a private Zoom after this where we can all have hear exactly what you want to say and you can join the after party. So with that, let's get started because Eli has some amazing thoughts. You may have seen him at Outlier or IEEE Viz or in many other incredible places. These are the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to go straight into politics first. So, Eli, welcome to Chart Chat. Would you like to give us a brief introduction and then just kick straight off into topic 1?
All right, I'm Eli Holder. I am a data designer and sometimes researcher. My firm is 3IAP. I like to focus on the psychology of data viz. I find it fascinating the way that data can both kind of reflect people, but also can influence people. And there's a feedback loop there that's just fascinating. And so I like to design around that, and I like to research that. And so what we'll talk about today is a couple of my research projects and one that's related to one of my collaborators, Cindy Bearfield. And we'll get started by talking about politics. Hooray.
All right. What could possibly be risky about this topic?
Nothing. There's cats involved.
There's cats. We're right? Fine. Off you go, Eli.
All right. Okay. So specifically, we're going to talk about political opinion polling charts like this one, and we're going to ask, how might polling charts undermine our fragile democracy? And since we're all exhausted with politics in the U.S., we're going to instead imagine a country that's like the United States, that's politically polarized between a blue party and a red party, except in this case, they're all animals. And so in a polarized country like this, you might see a lot of charts like these in the media showing big gaps in public opinion between the blue group and the red group. And to kind of understand how polling charts might influence this, we're going to first pick a topic. We're going to unpack a controversial idea in the animal kingdom regarding canned pet food. For context, canned pet food has bipartisan support. Both sides love it. Canada produces some of the best canned pet food. Dogs love it in particular. But for some reason, cats seem to strongly prefer domestic canned pet food. And so cats have proposed a policy called the Canadian Can Ban Plan, which says that the United States should ban canned pet food from Canada. This is Jake. He's a dog. Jake isn't particularly political, but if you were to ask him about the policy, he'd say he wasn't sure, but he was slightly unfavorable. On the other hand, this is Jane. Jane has a stronger attitude. If you were to ask her, she'd say that banning canned pet food from Canada was pretty close to the worst idea she'd ever heard. Also, fun fact, Jake and Jane are friends. Jake trusts Jane. And so if Jake were to learn about Jane's stronger attitude on this policy, we'd expect Jake to subconsciously shift his own attitudes to match his friend. Jake would become more opposed to the ban, just like Jane. And this is a thing from social psychology called a social conformity effect. We tend to match our attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, our values with the people around us. And this shapes a surprising amount of our politics. But we don't actually need to see people or talk to them to be influenced by them. Social conformity also works through charts. For example, imagine if Jake saw this polling result showing that the can ban plan was wildly unpopular, supported by just 33% of the population in the US. We'd expect this chart to have a similar effect as Jane, and we'd expect that when Jake sees this chart, he decreases support towards the can ban plan to match kind of what he sees in the poll. And where this gets weird is that the effect applies when the chart shows two different groups as well. For example, imagine a polling result showing that dogs hate the can ban plan, but cats are quite supportive. In this case, if you were to take a moderate dog like Jake and a moderate cat like Tom and show them these polling results, they'd identify with their own groups. And you might actually expect Jake and Tom's attitudes to diverge away from each other. In other words, they become more polarized with this issue. And this is exactly what we found in a study I did with Cindy last year. This is the control condition for topics where we asked about this. There was an average kind of baseline gap of about 12 points between Democrats and Republicans. But when we showed them the partisan polling chart, it actually doubled. It jumped to almost 20 points. And so to bring this back to our animal friends, this means that given a polarized partisan chart like this, we'd expect groups to anchor to their political parties and for their average attitudes to diverge away from each other. And so at a population level, this would have an effect like polarization that kind of hollows out the middle and kind of erodes common ground between people. And so an immediate thing to consider from this is that highlighting polarization can increase polarization. But I think the bigger implication is that public opinion polls kind of make us dumber. The basic unit of an opinion poll is an opinion. But polls can't tell us if an idea is good or not. It can't tell if it's true. It just tells us if it's popular. And so the effect of reading polls is that people become more opinionated, but they don't actually become more informed, which seems like a dangerous combination. But I think what's more important for designers is just remembering this social conformity effect. Our attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors are social, and they can very much spread through charts. And so we want to be careful about how charts communicate social norms, because those norms can actually spread through our charts. And so I thought we would walk through a couple examples of charts that show social norms, and see if we can unpack what we're seeing. What do we think?
Oh, look at those truncated axes, Eli.
First thing I saw.
This is not my design. This is from a study. The context of the study was they sent out a bunch of interventions to, I think, like tens of thousands of members of 24-Hour Fitness, which is a U.S. gym chain, to see just to see what the effect would have. And so if it's maybe the text is a little bit small, but each of these shows basically that exercise, that a lot of people exercise in the United States, and that rate is increasing. And these aren't true. The results that they're showing here aren't true. But this effect actually does work even when the data is true. So the question then is like, what are the norms that this kind of projects?
So this tells me people are exercising more, right? We've got that from the title. So social norms is that if other people are exercising more, maybe I should exercise more. That's also probably a true statement.
But the challenge there is so in this particular topic, so the conformity influence might be, I need to exercise more, then followed by actually a higher collective sense of guilt as people fail to achieve their goals. That's my conclusion.
Yep. So this is, I think in this intervention, they tested, it's a mega study. And so they tested like a lot of different things to just see what would work. And so what they found was, I think this was like the third most effective way to get people to actually go to the gym more. And it increased gym attendance by like double-digit percentages, which is pretty crazy for just like a chart and for something that nobody wants to do, like going to the gym.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, a positive example of social conformity. And then,
well, positive from whose perspective? The sales team at the gyms.
yes, exactly. Yeah, positive from
We'll especially enjoy the attrition rate from people going to the gym after 30 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe positive from a health perspective, positive from a capitalistic gym ownership perspective. But yeah, so it can work even when it's not polls. And then another example of it, and this is a little bit different. This is a chart that is well intentioned. This is not one that has been kind of tested for the social conformity effect, but strikes me as having the potential for it. So what do we think? What do we think this might do?
I will say from a public health perspective, if we're looking at adoption and booster adoption being low, which it takes a minute to really read it. Like I see it's much lower in the young people than the older people, which older folks were highly recommended and were early on adopted and early on had access, which I know as a public health person, but might not be the case for someone else. When you look at the comparison on this, there's not like a part to whole piece. That 47% appears to be the widest piece. So it almost looks like all of the 65 plusers, like squinting from a distance, got vaccinated. So if I'm older, I should get vaccinated like my colleagues and other people, but that it's not as necessary or well adopted for whatever reason, which then we can hypothesize. And whether you take a pro-vax or anti-vax stance, your hypotheses might be different around adoption in some of the younger age groups. But it's a really interesting one to me for you to present from a design perspective, because it does take a second to realize that less than half is the largest number that's even on that chart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so this was, I don't remember the timing of the actual data, but this was, I think it was relatively soon after this booster had come out. And I think that like for older people, the rates will kind of go up over time. But yeah, that's a fair point too, that it is less than half for this booster.
I think it's an interesting question about recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah. Steve?
But don't want to derail this, but when should we be showing the 100% mark? It looks, as Amanda said, it looks like everybody, in the 65 plus has taken it because that bar is so close to the margin. But should you in fact show, well, fewer than half have taken it? And I don't have the answer, and I don't want to derail what is a great session, but it's something I think about all the time.
I have a whole deck on that. Keep going, Eli.
Impact references, yeah. From a social normative perspective, like if you can give the perception that more people are doing it, if you can make it seem popular for the older group, that should have a follow-on effect, and more people would do it. The part that worries me about a chart like this is closer to I think Amanda identified this. For younger groups, they could see this and read this for whatever reason as getting boosted is not a thing that young people do. It's unpopular with young people. You could read into that as maybe I don't need to, without understanding that the reasons that there are disparities here are more structural. It's older people get access to boosters first, and so there's going to be a structural reason for them to be more highly vaccinated. But if you just read this without kind of knowing that context, it could be read as young people don't need to get vaccinated. And so it could have kind of a backfire effect of, instead of helping the group at the lower rate, it could actually backfire and hurt and discourage getting vaccinated.
Oh my gosh, I love this question about the design of the chart. It doesn't say that these were the yeses, right? There's nowhere on the chart that says the yeses.
The yeses.
Like, is this the yes, percent yes or percent no? It doesn't actually say that. It just gives the question.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. 47%.
Also, this is a reproduction that I did just to kind of like give it some stage makeup, and so I may have left off a label or two.
Well, and this too, and this is an interesting question on the relative population sizes in terms of what that looks like, which I'd be really curious on your take Eli, about kind of, especially in working with health and healthcare data, where demographic sizes of our denominators can change a lot in terms of number of people. How do you approach deciding when to go ahead and put that kind of information in, and how might it influence some of the conformity pieces?
So I think population size becomes important, especially at smaller populations, because if you're looking at anything like rates, it can, with just smaller groups of people, rates can get a little wild. And so having them disclosed when it would create some kind of distortion, I think is pretty important. I think in this case, though, my understanding of kind of the design goals for a chart like this is closer to how do we get young people boosted. It's kind of pointing out a problem of kind of the delay in younger people getting boosted. And so I think that there's the populations would be even enough between these kind of age groups that wouldn't be, I think, a concern for the communication goals of this particular chart. But it does come up in other areas, and that it is a thing to kind of keep your eye on.
So that's cool. Eli, can we go back to the polling chart? Because there, I'm like, I believe the hypothesis. I'm bought into your research results. But what do we do? Right? I mean, I want to show that information, right? But then how do I show that information and not perpetuate the splintering of human groupings?
So in our study, we tested a bunch of different redesigns of this, and none of them reduced the effect. So we tried this with showing jitter plots. We tried this in other ways to see if we could reduce the polarization effect. And it was not a thing that we could solve with design, at least with the things that we tried. I think the thing that didn't have a polarization effect was if you just show the overall population average. That we were kind of hoping that would actually like create some convergence and depolarize people. It didn't do that, but just showing the overall effect. So like the little gray dots in this case, at least didn't kind of make polarization worse. And I think one of my kind of takeaways that I've gotten to is just we should be doing less charts like these to begin with. It's a kind of dangerous data set to work with. You're right. But I think one of the legit use cases for polling charts, at least from like a kind of pro-democracy perspective, is if you have public officials that are doing things or kind of like spouting, making claims about like what's popular or not, and you can say like, no, that's actually not the case. That's a legit use of kind of political polling. But I think that when you divide it up by parties, you lose that. You're just kind of helping people kind of game the system and looking at it more cynically. But if you can show the overall population support something, I think that can help correct political narratives that might be put out there.
So we've obviously just come through the UK general election, and the TV channels and the press have come in for some criticism for the amount of which they just reported on polling, right? And it wasn't, I obsess over it because I'm a political junkie and it's a great excuse to look at charts. But it is really interesting hearing some of the criticisms. It's like all that time you spent talking about polling and graphing this data, you could have been talking about policies. And it's like, that literally sounds so obvious as I say it out loud now. But, I think, but I hadn't really thought of that. It's like, those hundreds and hundreds of hours talking about what people think could have been challenging politicians on what they actually mean when they put their manifestos together.
Yeah, I mean, that would be for like political data viz, I think has an important role, a strong role. It could do a lot of good. I think the more that it's focused on policy and policy implications, even if that's kind of there's less drama there, it's maybe a little bit less exciting. I think that it's the more kind of important thing. And there's I can't remember his name now, but there's a quote of when you're talking about politics, you want to focus on the stakes, not the odds. You want to focus on what would be the results of an election as opposed to like who's up, who's down. And I think that for any political data viz, the more you can show the implications of kind of what an election would mean, what a policy would mean, and kind of help people understand how policies work more mechanistically, more in more detail. That's kind of where we want to devote our efforts towards kind of political data viz.
And you know what? I think that's a good way to segue into the next section, because I'm sitting there going, all right, let's viz some data about climate change or other such non-controversial topics and see how that goes. Should we move on?
Great segue.
Yeah. I mean, that's almost like we rehearsed it, but we didn't.
Well, and let's give a quick word of credit to the author of that mantra. It sounds like New York University journalism professor Jay Rosen.
Jay Rosen, yes.
We put a link in the chat button below if you want to read a short clip from CNN talking about that mantra.
Jay Rosen writes a lot about this. I'm embarrassed that I forgot his name, but
okay.
Google him. Read anything that he puts out. He's I think one of the more important media voices, especially at this moment. Okay, so let's move on to topic 2. Okay. And so here we're going to explore kind of a fun quirk in how people consume information. And we're going to look at a more unassuming chart and ask this question, could a chart like this justify climate inaction? And again, we're going to talk conceptually first, and then we'll come back to the chart. And so we'll start here. This is an inkblot that you might use for something like a Rorschach test. And the idea is that you show patients a super ambiguous image like this, and you ask them what they see, and their answers are supposed to reveal their deepest, darkest fears and secrets and desires. And so I thought we would try this out on you guys. What do you guys see? Let's see if we can reveal some of your deep, dark secrets.
What do I see in this Rorschach test?
Yeah.
Oh, we are actually doing the test.
Yeah.
Oh, crikey. Steve, what do you see?
Ooh, that was mean, Andy. Well, I see an exploding 3D pie chart.
I see an angry moose.
I was going to say
I
dog.
see a lion.
It looks like a dog to me.
I'm like Mark. I see the goat that was in the film Witch, which has haunted me ever since I saw that damn film, because it was the scariest horror film I've seen in decades. Evil Rabbit, yes.
I'll just X-ray. That wins for the most specific, Charlotte.
Yeah. Oh, it is a pelvic X-ray. Yeah.
It does. Now I see it. Now that someone else said it.
Yeah. I can't help but see a grumpy moose. Like that's just all I see when I look at it. I think I want to call out Christine for the evil rabbit, though. That's relevant. So we're gonna move on to another image. What do we see here?
Well, that's a duck.
It's a rabbit.
Duck season, rabbit season.
Rabbit, duck bit.
So this is the famous duck rabbit, and of course it looks like a duck. It looks like a rabbit, and so even though the inkblot and the duck rabbit are kind of ambiguous, the duck rabbit has a more limited range of possibilities. It's either a duck or a rabbit, but it's not as open-ended as something like an inkblot, right? So now what do we see?
That's rabbit.
I'm just enjoying Anne's live stream of comments of oh, I see it both ways.
And I'm with you. I'm with you on that train of thought. That is a very cute rabbit in a very cute little rain jacket.
That's what I'm seeing. Yes.
Good. Okay. So this one is much more definite. It's 12 cute bunnies wearing a pinkish raincoat. You might actually see that one of these is maybe a squirrel, like in disguise, unclear. But everybody who looks at this is going to go, 12 bunnies, great.
8 bunnies. Where are the other 4?
8. I can't count. Oh my God.
Yeah, we're all getting paranoid now. We're like,
I was real worried there for a second.
Eli's messing with our heads.
Yeah, no, that was not a test. That's just me not knowing how to count. So moving on. So if we lay these out on a spectrum, we can see that there's kind of a range of ambiguity, right? On the left are the bunnies, which are concrete and definite, and on the right are the inkblots, which are very ambiguous. But what's kind of more interesting about the spectrum is that as the imagery becomes more ambiguous, it becomes more reflective. When things are ambiguous, it leaves room for people to see what they want to see. And so what I'd like to suggest is that even though we often think about data viz as being kind of definite or objective, in a lot of cases it acts more like an inkblot test or a Rorschach test. Instead of teaching us something new, it acts more like a mirror and just kind of reflects back what we're already expecting to see. And this means that it can help us kind of confirm our prior beliefs, even when it shouldn't. And so we're going to look at an example of this. This chart was one that they used in a semi-recent experiment. As you can see, it shows average global temperature change over the last 150 years or so. Do we think this is ambiguous? Is there room for misinterpretation here?
I'm leaning towards it's reflective, but it's climate change. So I suspect you're going to pull the wool from the carpet from underneath me.
I think I would normally describe a line chart as relatively objective, but I feel like
Yeah.
I also recognize that the purpose of this exercise is to highlight how line charts are probably not
Context
terribly
gives it
objective
away.
all the time because we bring context and political preferences to those conversations.
Well, that's exactly right. So what's interesting here is that the chart, the data, relatively straightforward, but it still acts like an inkblot test because of where people decide to focus. So the researchers found that if you are more conservative leaning and you look at this chart, you tend to fixate on the left part where the rise is flatter. If you are more left leaning, then you tend to fixate on the right side of the chart where the rise is kind of more extreme. And what this suggests is that even though the plot is straightforward, people still find a way to kind of read it through the lens of their prior beliefs, or in this case, their politics. And this happens in this case at a pretty low level. It's not like a conscious thing. It's just where your eyes tend to fixate on the page. And so coming back to our original question, what's the pathway for this to undermine climate action, or at least for some part of the audience? Other studies, and this one as well, have kind of suggested a similar effect where about the way that we consume information. Different people can look at the same data and reach totally different conclusions based on their prior beliefs or based on their politics. So somebody might look at this and see, of course, climate change is kind of accelerating, while other people could look at the chart and see evidence that climate change happens naturally or that it's happened slowly. And if that's what you take away from this chart, then this chart effectively acts as evidence that climate change isn't a big deal, or at least it kind of leaves open that possibility. And so I think the idea to consider here is to think about how charts can act like ink blots. Instead of offering people a window into some objective reality, sometimes they can act more like mirrors and just kind of confirm our pre-existing beliefs. And so I've got a few examples of charts that I think have this kind of ink blot test where they can lead to this ink blot effect where they can lead to differing conclusions. We've got a few of these we can walk through. If you guys have preferences, let me know. Otherwise, we can just walk through them.
Before we do, I'm like, you're filling me with despair.
Well, this one's a little more hopeful. This one, the polling one is the most depressing. But this one, there are better solutions to this one.
Is there a solution to the climate one?
Yeah, I think.
Well, I hang on. I'm going to qualify my own question. I mean, what do we? What's the point of even showing the data if our views are already made, right? You know, are we trying to show this information to change people's minds, or are we trying to show it to confirm people's prior beliefs? That neither of which I have an answer to.
So I think the important thing to kind of get at is that for this, when you leave it open-ended, you're allowing people to kind of see what they want to see. And this is an effect of I think letting the data speak for itself. Mm-hmm. When you give it a more assertive title, when you give it focus on the parts that you want people to focus on, people will focus on that, and it can help I think correct some of the. It's at least not letting people just see what they want to see. You're at least confronting them with something that's closer to reality, in this case for climate change. And this is this is still kind of a topic that's debated around, like, should you correct people or not for misinformation. I think the consensus is leaning towards it is generally better to correct people, even if it does have kind of an immediate kind of effective reactance of like, oh, I'm grumpy that you told me something I don't believe. Even considering that, I think the research is starting to lean towards it's better to correct.
So if I annotated the rise and said this shows that climate change is real, and showed that to a Republican or somebody who is skeptical of climate change, they'd be grumpy, but they might internalize my message.
The immediate effect is they will be grumpy. The immediate effect for liberals who see this is a thing that they studied later in the same study, is that for left-leaning people who already believe in this, you engage them further, and so it evens out in what happens kind of immediately. But the overall effect of we want good information to be out in the world and we don't want to let misinformation stand, I think it's still better to correct, even if it leads to kind of immediate grumpiness.
Fascinating.
Can
Chatters, any other comments? Amanda?
Oh, well, I think this is fascinating to me. I'm going to steal the screen for just a minute. Is that, like, when you think about kind of where this kind of data gets displayed and shared, like if you go to the NASA Climate Vital Signs and Earth Information Center work and you look here, you can see that all of their kind of data where they're presenting some of the global data about how temperatures have changed over time, whether it's on various different displays, all say at the top, global temperatures are rising.
Mm-hmm.
Greenhouse gas levels are increasing. And this was this Arctic sea ice is shrinking. Like, they're so short and to the point and tell you that. Yeah. And the purpose of this kind of whole entire display, from having various conversations as part of working on our new book with the design team, is that, I mean, it's important to give people that kind of clear information, because it's a public advocacy tool and a kind of tool to influence and share with policymakers. So you really move away from those more indicator-driven titles. So I think it's just a curious question to me always, in terms of where we see those more that text get used in a way that allows us to better know what the key takeaway is. And I actually like the brevity of those titles a lot. It just makes a statement about what is happening right now without making a statement about, like, climate change is real, but rather saying this number is going up. And then maybe that leaves it open to too much interpretation. I'd be curious on your take on crafting those kind of titles.
I'm terrible at crafting those kind of titles because I'm long-winded in my writing. But having something that is short and memorable, I agree, is generally better and makes it more kind of referenceable on the page. I think having them paired with something that is as descriptive as possible is there's kind of a balancing act there. So I think when you can do it as short as possible, that's the best case. But I tend to lean towards, like, it's better to be a little bit long, take a little bit more room than it is to kind of leave it open-ended. But I think that it's just a kind of craft question of where do you fall on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the
Steve, I'll come to you in a minute.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Steve, go ahead.
Yes, the arc of story finding to storytelling to story spinning. Even with this data, I could focus on that peak that's in the blue area, and then there's the lowest point in the blue area, and I could write something with a catchy title and say, see, even in the most recent period, average temperatures are going down. You know, I'm not able to focus on it right now, but I could really spin something that is highly inaccurate and misleading. But it's the real data, but I'm just cherry picking this highest point and cherry picking this lowest point, putting a grabby title on. Andy, I think one of your colleagues at Tableau did this research that the importance of a title that makes a chart memorable. And I could spin this in a pretty insidious way.
I mean, that's brilliant, Steve. I don't think I've ever heard you, or I've never heard that. Story finding, storytelling to story spinning, right? That's the perfect I'm showing my Iraq's bloody toll example if people haven't seen this. This is Simon Scar's 2010 chart. It looks like a smear of blood. It's showing deaths from conflict in Iraq, 2003 to 2011. So the data lends itself to this blood smear, and he pointed the bars down, colored them red. So he spun a story of really focusing on the human conflict. So those of you who haven't seen this before, if you make it a normal bar chart and point it upwards, and then take away the evocative color, you can actually see there's fewer deaths than there have been at any time in this data set. So this same data story can be spun as deaths on the decline. And that's brilliant. This is two ways to spin the story. I don't think anybody disputes the data. It's a boring bar chart, but it's been spun, right? So yeah, that's I'm amazed, Steve. I'm amazed we've never come up with that before.
Well, this is all bumming me out too, Andy.
Yeah, well, we could also, so there's that. Eli, any comments on any Steve and me?
The conscious spin step is I think kind of a false consideration. Like the people bring their own frames to it is part of what I think this study kind of highlights. So whether or not you point out a specific part of it, people will already be doing that with kind of their prior beliefs. And so what I think so even for something like the climate change one, if you were to be insidious and give it a title that like really points out something that is not true, you're at least being definite enough that you give people something to respond to and say like, oh no, that conclusion is not true, as opposed to when you leave it ambiguous, then people who already believe that would kind of read into it anyways. And so I think the more assertive, more definite title at least gets it, at least makes things explicit so that it's something that can be responded to as opposed to something that works by implication.
I work a lot with people doing business data analysis, right? And this same problem is actually quite healthy inside a business organization, right? Because we wouldn't recommend any business makes all its decisions based on data. At some point, we're going to interpret information. We've got a source of data and a source of facts from which comes, this is sales over time or whatever it is, right? And then in a meeting, we can discuss our interpretations of this data. And in a healthy team environment, that conversation surfaces the biases and can be dealt with in a really good, healthy way. So exactly. It's almost like the same psychology actually can have a positive thing, but obviously in our media-facing political world, we're not really having those conversations, but they can happen, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. I think the dynamic of you show a conclusion in a meeting that other people disagree with, when you've made the conclusion clear and you kind of invite that disagreement, at least it's getting out in the open. Yeah. As opposed to if you leave it ambiguous, then you have like everybody in the room going like, oh yeah, like it seems like people agree on it, but nobody's actually agreeing to the same thing.
That is true. And that's part of a healthy data culture. Right. Thomas has put overlaying a fitted polynomial would highlight the upswing. Now I'm like, it would, but it would also leave 99% of lay people thoroughly confused. Perhaps. Right.
So some of the interesting stuff in this study was that they in later parts of the study they highlighted different parts of it to see how people responded. And so they would roughly the parts that I have like the split here. They highlighted one part in red versus black, and then they kind of switched it. And people actually do respond to just giving it more visual emphasis, and that had an effect on like people's willingness to donate and support things. And so the visual design choices of like what we make, what we choose to emphasize with visual treatments can make a difference. But Cindy did a study kind of on top of that, comparing visual emphasis versus just like we're going to make the title say the conclusion. And I think the title wins most times. And Steve, I think you cited a study around if the people respond to the title more than they respond to anything. And I think that there are other studies that back that up where like they've tested if the title and the chart conflict, people remember the title, not the chart itself. And
Michelle Borkin, is that? Yeah.
I can't remember. We can find it and I can find you guys a link. But I think it does emphasize that the writing is I think one of the most important parts of data viz. And it's something that I say to clients all the time. Like half of data viz is just kind of good writing. And so it does, you want a lot of that stuff you want that stuff to be as aligned as possible.
Brilliant. All right. Well, third topic is now it's about self-reflection. So let's move on to it. First of all, Thomas, by the way, I wasn't trying to put you down with your comment about polynomials. I appreciate the comment. It would be a good thing. So thanks for the comment. And Amanda has put in the link to Michelle Borkin's paper about memorability. Oh, that was Jeff.
That was all Jeff. That was all Jeff.
All right. So, Eli, is this one going to make us feel super positive?
No. No. It's only going to get worse. But
Eli, it's been a rough month. I didn't realize you're going so dark.
This one is more positive in that this is probably where I have the most concrete, like, here's a problem we can do something about.
Excellent.
So this is hopeful in that, like, I have positive, actionable advice to make the world better here. But it's going to get dark first.
Sorry, that's the best comment of the day so far. Actually, I have been at a party with Eli in the last IEEE Viz, and he was fun to be with. But we talked about this. That's actually true, isn't it? We talked about this, and it was great fun. Carry on.
All right, let's jump in. Okay, so what can charts suggest about people? So I think this is important if we're visualizing people, if we're trying to uncover topics on anything related to social justice or equity. This is a thing that we want to know about. And so we're going to start with another example chart. This is even more depressing. And we're going to ask, can health equity charts undermine health equity? But before we get into the chart, we're going to do a little mini experiment to unpack some of the psychology. And the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to tell you guys a quick story about Andy. And then I'm going to ask you guys a couple of questions. So I'd like everybody to imagine that you're traveling, you're out of town, and you step into a coffee shop for some caffeine, and you get done. And as you walk out, you look across the street and you see there's a park. And something catches your eye, something moving, and you stop and you look and you see that it's Andy, and he's dancing very enthusiastically. He also appears to be wearing a rather suggestive leopard print bodysuit and cat ears and a matching fuzzy tail and a t-shirt that says, "Who's been a bad kitty?" You also see that he's got his phone mounted in front of him, and it looks like this is probably a TikTok dance of some sort. You're too far away to make out his expression, but it's definitely him. And based on his movement, he's putting a lot of effort into this dance. And so our first question is, why do we think that Andy is dancing in the park?
You said this wouldn't make us feel better. I'm feeling better.
You got to have some comic relief if you're going to get this dark.
Wow. I'm not.
I mean, if you know Andy well, you might not think twice about this. That's what Andy does.
I think that Tableau is preparing for a collaboration with Petco for an upcoming Viz challenge.
New Iron Viz outfit.
I see lost a bet, secret hobby, because he's fabulous.
Oh, Ida, you're my favorite. But, blimey. I mean, this one, why is it not showing? Yeah, I mean, the last IronViz, I was out on the beach writing IronViz in the sand while being filmed in my shiny jacket. So it's not like, I mean, I've trod close to this line before, but yeah, who knows?
All right, I see a couple good ones. Boost his social media presence, new career path. But I want to change it up really quick. Let's say that the situation is reversed, and now it's actually that Andy has caught you dancing suggestively in a public park. Why might you be dancing in a public park for TikTok? I'm trying to make himself feel better. That's a good one too.
Should we be answering that? Yeah, come on, everybody on. Why would you? I guess comments. You can add comments.
Answer for yourself. Why would you be doing this?
Oh, I absolutely lost a bet if I'm doing this in a public park in that outfit.
I'd say it'd have something to do with my kids and a school project or something.
Oh yeah, that's all.
Yeah.
Too many
mimosas. There you go.
A good one. All right, so we've covered the range of answers, I think. What's interesting here is that, or I think what we want to unpack is that when asked why was Andy dancing, a lot of the explanations will sound like he enjoys dancing, he wants the attention, he wants to be TikTok famous, and these are all what we would call personal attributions. They're explanations that assume that his TikTok dance is entirely his choice, or that it's based on some characteristic trait like just enjoying dancing or kind of like wanting attention. But on the other hand, when we answer questions about ourselves, they tend to sound more like I lost a bet, or a bee was chasing me, or I was trying to cheer up a dear friend who likes sexy cats. It wasn't my choice. And external attributions are when we explain behavior in terms of external forces or outside influences. But where this gets weird is that in Western cultures like the United States, we're actually very biased towards these personal attributions. We tend to assume that other people's choices or outcomes are entirely within their own control. And one of the few exceptions to this is when we describe ourselves, because it's easier for us to imagine outside forces impacting us and not so easy to imagine how they impact other people. And so this is another idea from social psychology. It's the fundamental attribution error or attribution biases. And it's why you'd be more likely to blame Andy's dance on his TikTok ambitions rather than trying to cheer up a friend. Okay, we're going to go back. We're going to try to clear those images out of our minds, and we're going to get depressing again and start to talk about mortality. All right, so how do we relate this back to charts? Let's come back to our example chart. This shows mortality rates for heart disease decomposed across 4 different groups. You can see that, for example, every year, 102 out of every 100,000 people from Group B die from heart disease, but that rate is much lower for other groups. Why do we think that is? Why are the differences here? I'm going to bring the mood right back down.
Diet.
Group B gets less quality healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's 2 ways that we can kind of bucket these responses. There's external explanations. There's personal explanations. Some people might explain these differences in terms of external attributions like lack of affordable healthcare, redlining, environmental justice issues, or you might explain them in terms of personal attributions about the people in the chart. You might speculate about unhealthy habits or bad diets or even genetic differences. But thanks to the fundamental attribution error, we're much more likely to jump to these kind of personal attributions and blame these outcomes on the people that we see in the chart. And so this bias can be quite strong, and bar charts actually make it significantly worse. In our last experiment, we found that 82% of people who saw this bar chart agreed that the disparities were mainly caused by personal choices, while just 18% attributed them to external forces. And I'm not showing it here, but we also tested this by where the groups were racial groups and saw similar effects. And so what's more concerning here is that this kind of victim blaming tendency, the personal attribution bias, when it's applied to an entire group, especially if it's like a racial group or an identity group, these are essentially stereotypes. And so if you believe that these outcome differences are caused by differences in personal characteristics, then you implicitly believe in a harmful stereotype that people with worse outcomes are somehow worse people. And so that's super depressing. But what can we do about it? It turns out that part of the issue is actually with design. It's these conventional bar charts can make this worse. But before we get into that, let's talk about stereotypes, just to get some context. So stereotypes are misperceptions of dispersion or variability. For example, let's consider a stereotype that people in this purple group are especially high earners. Stereotypes assume that within a group, people are more similar than they really are, and that between groups, people are more different than they really are. And so this stereotype implies a distribution like this one on the right, where not only do people in the purple group earn more, their earnings are very similar. And therefore, all purple people seem to earn more than all other people. But in reality, even if average earnings for people in the purple group are higher than average earnings for everybody else, the distributions will still look something like this chart on the left. You can see that earnings are widely distributed within groups, and that between groups, there's a lot of overlap. And this will generally be true for any kind of social outcomes, especially if the groups are based on something as loosely defined as race. So then the next question is, like, could certain charts create these misperceptions? And so we'll do another example, this time looking at earnings for 4 different groups. The distribution on the left is close to reality for income differences between something like racial groups. And again, you can see there are a lot more differences within groups than there are between groups. But if we take these distributions and plot them as a bar chart of average income for each group, we'd end up with a chart like this one in the middle where, but when people see this bar chart, they may not imagine the distribution on the left. They probably imagine something more like this on the right. Without any indication of variability, a lot of times we just assume that it's not there. And so just like with stereotypes, charts like these can create a false impression that people within groups are more similar than they really are, and that between groups, people are more different than they really are. On the other hand, if we show these same distributions as a jitter plot or any other chart that shows kind of the range of outcomes within groups, it becomes very apparent that within groups, there's a lot of variation, and between groups, there's a lot of overlap. This actually parallels real life, where the more exposure you have to people from other groups, the easier it is to see them as individuals and the harder it is to stereotype them. And so we've tested this in 4 experiments now across a bunch of different contexts and now 2 different papers. And we've pretty consistently found that charts that hide variability increase stereotyping relative to charts that emphasize variability. The good news, though, is that there is something we can do about it. We can show variability. And so when we're visualizing social outcomes, the thing that we can do to minimize blame and stereotyping, at least one thing we can do, is showing variability. And so charts like this, like the jitter plot and prediction intervals, they show within group variability, and this makes it easy to see how much outcomes vary within groups and overlap between groups. And this makes it harder to misread charts as evidence for harmful stereotypes. And as a bit of good news, these are charts that we tested in a recent test. The ones on the right do significantly better versus bar charts. It doesn't solve the problem entirely, but it can make a big difference. And so there are things that we can do, and I think there's room to do even better than what we have on the right. Amanda, ignore the extremely long title, but things like this can't. We are making progress here in kind of like working against some of these biases that we have when we look at charts like these.
Brilliant. Okay, so people are liking it. This is positive, Eli, right?
This is positive. This is cool. So this starts from an even more depressing place. Like humans, especially in the United States, are extremely judgy towards other people in ways that are not fair at all. However, we can solve at least a little of this with our design choices.
Yeah. Was it so? Desiree's just said they're facing a client project right now for furiously taking screenshots. but I mean, the reason I show that comment is because I think, again, in our business environment, some leaders, some C-suite people would push against the jitter. They just like, oh, it's too detailed. Just give me the summary. And you're like, well, we have to educate you. It's hard to get this message through about the difference.
Yeah, I mean, so that comes up a lot. That's one of the more common pushbacks to this is that the jitter is too detailed. It seems complex, but actually there's a fair bit of research that shows bar charts can be, even though they feel simpler, they end up being more misleading, and so it's kind of a false sense of clarity. On the other hand, with jitter plots specifically, our brains are really good at picking out patterns of lots of little dots. Like, so in the same way that you can look out at like a field of grass and see which way the wind is blowing without having to look at like each individual like blade of grass, with distributions of little dots, our brains are really good at like picking out the center and picking out what the, like doing basically like kind of visual statistical analysis on things like jitters. And so the what we with the chart on the right, it has you'll take a hit because it's less familiar, but in terms of just like what works the best, it's still the one on the right. And we've tested this. In this test, we were testing other outcomes for public health, like how do these affect things like risk perceptions? How does it affect like behavioral intent? And we found that these two charts have identical performance for everything except for stereotyping. The chart on the left makes stereotypes worse. The chart on the right makes them better. It leads to more blame. And so the kind of performance of both of these are similar, except for one's a little bit more hateful, one's a little bit more hopeful.
Yeah, that's great. Right, well, we've got 3 minutes to go, so I think I might begin to wrap up. I like Lisa's quote. Adam Grant is a fantastic speaker and writer. My favorite bias is the "I'm not biased" bias. Americans think they're less biased than the average person. I mean, isn't that the same? Everybody thinks they're a better driver, above average driver.
Bias, yeah.
Yeah. So, right. Well, I think so much food for thought there. Steve, is that your? Is that your pencil?
That's my one comment, and then I have to bail a little early. The jitter plot also allows you to see some crazy outlier that's skewing things.
Yeah.
So you're showing average salary, and I love the book Math with Bad Drawings by Ben Orlin. And somebody asks, well, what's the average starting salary? And Jeff and I have jammed on this a whole bunch of times. Well, let me just say the average starting salary is $80,000. And you see CEO's son makes $430,000 and you and everybody else makes $30,000, but the average is $80,000.
Yeah, I think we could spend another hour on these charts personally because I see the jitter plot. I'm a big fan. And then I say to myself, well, yeah, but that's only works because you have 50 states. If you have, 1.3 billion people in India, you can't put 1.3 billion dots on the page, right? So you have a restriction there. So then you go to another chart and you use a box plot or something like that. And then, if I look at your chart specifically, there's 50 states, but are we aggregating? You're kind of doing the same thing that the bar chart is you're showing the average of Michigan. What if you broke that up by the counties in Michigan, right? And rural versus the cities. So this goes down a rabbit hole that we could probably spend another hour on.
But it is a very important point, especially for social justice issues. Social justice is very, very local, so a lot of times if you aggregate at the state level, you'll lose stories that you need to tell. It works in this case. You have to you do just like any kind of design. It has to fit with the data. It has to work with what the data actually says. But this is a tool that kind of can be used. It also doesn't have to be jitter plots. Prediction intervals showing the range can have a similar effect as well.
Brilliant. Right. Okay, Steve, Steve's gone. He's going to go and start at the. No, he doesn't. I'm doing the after party Zoom. So. This has been fascinating. People are saying this has been fascinating. I think I agree. I will say that exercise about me dancing in the park, absolutely ridiculous. Here is me literally dancing with cows dressed as Alice Cooper in my village.
I should have just used this picture. I didn't even
know. Yes, this was all in service of Iron Viz during COVID. And yes, believe me, I will dance in a Central Park in a maybe I won't.
You pick the right host to pick on, Eli.
All right, on that bombshell, let's wrap things up. Let's keep things up. Steve has some world-class dashboard building workshops coming up September the 10th and 12th. They'll be online. So I'm not going to leave this QR code on here for very long, but do check those out. We'll be sending links to everybody soon. Bigpick.me, can't say it. Bigpick.me/works. No, you've all read it. If you're a Tableau person, then that's awesome. We've got a big DataFam Europe event happening in London, 11th to 12th of November. We got keynotes, we got product demos, we've got all the DataFam whizziness coming up for that. That's the QR code. It's disappearing. But if you Google DataFam Europe, you will find the links to sign up and get some details. We are now going to go to the after party. And Eli, I believe you are joining.
I will see you there.
Yeah. So this is the URL. I'm going to disappear now because I've got to set the Zoom up this month. So wish me luck, everybody. Hopefully there'll be a Zoom to do it. So Amanda, could you just do the final round?
Yeah,
I'll wrap us
all up as you go ahead and hop off and create that Zoom link, Andy. It was great to have everyone here. Thank you so much, Eli. I think one of the best comments I've seen on any of our chart chats actually is this very specific thank you from Heather on the insights being so actionable, which is always fabulous when we're talking to a researcher. That's not always the case. So thank you for being someone who can distill and communicate some things. And I don't think we've also ever had so many cats and dogs in suits presented during chart chat. So you get a bonus shout out for that. We're going to go ahead and wrap up Chart Chat Live and hop on over to that after party. If you haven't clicked on the link, feel free to do so now. We hope you'll come and have a conversation and bring your questions for Eli and maybe bring a dose of your own photos if you'd like to, of you dancing in fields and prancing with animals, if that's your jam. We'll go ahead and we'll hop on over there. Thank you all so much for being here and have a wonderful rest of your month. We will be offline for August. We are taking a Chart Chat sabbatical for August as everyone takes some summer break time off, and we'll be back in September to continue the rest of our chart chats for 2024. With that, farewell team. We'll see you over in the after party.
Thank you, Eli.